Let's take a look at fiction and nonfiction. So that's what this video will be about. So what we will be looking at is kind of just your basic definition of fiction and nonfiction. Make sure you're familiar with that. We'll look at different types of fiction, like there's short story or novel, fable, fairy tale, things like that. And then we'll also look at a bunch of components of fiction, some terms that you want to be familiar with, like theme, rising and falling action, setting, stuff like that. And then we'll finish up with real basics on the differences between biography, autobiography, and memoir. So we like to start with some questions that we're going to be evaluating throughout this video, and then we'll come back to these questions at the end and see if you can answer them. So we start off with, what is a fable? What's the difference between a fairy tale and a tall tale? Memoir and biography? The controlling idea or central insight in a piece of fiction? Highest point of interest and turning point of the story, what do we call that? And differences between rising action and falling action. So some of that stuff I kind of just said in the intro. Okay, so as we look at fiction versus nonfiction. So fiction is just a form of literature that describes imaginary events and people, while nonfiction deals with or offers opinions or conjectures based on facts and reality, and that can include a biography, history, or an essay. Okay, so we get into these types of fiction here. So a short story has features such as theme, setting, conflict, point of view, plot, and so on. And if any of those are terms that you're a little foggy on, we'll get right into them when we get into components of fiction. The novel is today the longest genre of narrative prose fiction, followed by the novella, short story, and flash fiction. But really, that's your main takeaway there with novel, is knowing that it's the longest genre of fiction. That could easily be a question. A short tale in which a moral lesson is taught, which is often with animals or inanimate objects, are characters in a fable. The Tortoise and the Hare is a famous fable that you could easily see referenced in a question. It is one of Aesop's fables, in which ingenuity and trickery are employed to overcome a stronger opponent. A fairy tale, on the other hand, is a fictional story involving humans, magical events, and usually animals. A tall tale describes unbelievable events. So, like the story of Paul Bunyan is a tall tale, and that would be also like very likely if you had a question about tall tale. Paul Bunyan might be referenced, and making sure you knew that's a tall tale is not a fairy tale or a fable. And while we didn't list it here, pre-adolescent literature is mostly focused on tween issues, such as their changing lives and bodies. Relationships are also commonly explored. If you saw that question, I would think that the answer would be pretty self-evident. Okay, components of fiction. So we've got quite a few here, yeah? So we'll start with protagonist, antagonist. The protagonist is the main character of the story, with all major events having some importance to this character, and the antagonist opposes this character. Plot refers to the sequence of events inside a story that affect other events through the principle of cause and effect. So with plot, you're just thinking of sequence of events. While theme is its controlling idea, the controlling idea in a piece of fiction, or the central insight. So again, underlying meaning, central insight, that's what we should be thinking about as far as theme goes. It's the author's underlying meaning or main idea that he's trying to convey. So some examples: don't judge a book by its cover would be a theme. Other popular themes include love is kind and people are afraid to change. So getting a question in which you try to identify which one of these is not a theme would be a very common type of question that you might see. When we look at rising action, This is where events in the story become complicated and the conflict in the story is revealed. This would be events between the introduction and climax. As opposed to following action, this is when events and complications are beginning to resolve themselves. We'll keep going here because we still got a few more that just show up a lot. Setting is usually thought of as time and place, right? You can see it there in parentheses. With setting, we just want to think time and place. If you know that, you know enough about setting. But it is true that the description of that place could count as setting. Therefore, something like weather conditions would constitute being part of setting. Mood and atmosphere are also commonly part of setting. Okay, moving on. We still have a few more on, 3 more here on components of fiction. Climax, pretty easy to guess. Climax is the highest point of interest and the turning point of the story. So if they asked what is the turning point of the story, that's where maybe you might think it was something else, but that's the climax. Denouement is the final outcome or untangling of events in the story. And then last but not least, narrative exposition is the insertion of important background information within a story. As an example, information about the setting, characters' backstories, prior plot events, historical context, things like that. That's what you'd see for narrative exposition. But if you have in your mind narrative exposition is important background information, you're in pretty good shape. So as you look at all the stuff that we put in parentheses, is if you if you can just say this, like these are all basically like 3-word answers, maybe as many as 5 or 6 in some cases. If you know that, you know enough, right? We don't have to go really deep into possibilities in terms of rising or falling action. If you just have an understanding setting means time and place, that's enough for setting. Okay, so then finally we get into I think part of this got cut off on the title of this page, but it's biography, autobiography, and memoir, and being able to differentiate the 3. So biography is an account of someone else's life that's written by someone else, while an autobiography is written by the person the book is about. So if it's my autobiography, it's me writing about me. And then finally, memoir is really pretty similar to biography or autobiography, but it's much more narrow in scope. A memoir will focus on specific moments or turning points in a life and will not try to tell the whole life story. Okay, so if you have, again, what we have in parentheses is that's what we want you to be able to focus on and remember. Memoir is more narrow in scope. Autobiography is me writing about me. Biography, somebody else writing about me. If you got that, you're good to go on that section. All right, and then we get back into our questions again at the end. So what is a fable, right? We went over that one in the beginning. And so it tends to be with these questions at the end, I won't go and answer them again. And that really what you want from like an active learning standpoint is when you just listen to the answer being told to you, is the likelihood that you remember it is much less. Where if you hit pause here and go through these questions, even if it means if you don't know some of them, you have to go back and listen to the video again, the likelihood that you remember because you put in that work is much, much greater, right? And that's really how you should be thinking about education, both for your students, right? But also for yourself as far as learning and being able to commit these things to memory. So anyway, that is the end of this video, and I hope that it helped you out.